German tank crews believed the Soviet T-34 was technically inferior crewed, underpowered, and nothing compared to the engineering of their Panzer IVs and Tiger is. They were wrong. On July 12, 1943, in the fields near Prokhorovka, the reality would shatter their assumptions. Over 6,000 tanks, including more than 1,200 German Tigers and Panthers, and at least 3,000 Soviet T-34 76s and KV-1s, faced off in one of history's largest armored clashes. German planners had pegged Soviet armor as vulnerable, inefficient, and no match for their own vehicles' firepower and optics. But the Red Army's 5th Guards Tank Army had something the Germans hadn't calculated precisely. The 45mm sloped armor of the T-34, devised for maximum ballistic deflection, absorbing or deflecting shells even from the German long-barreled 75mm and feared 88mm guns. In the chaos, German calculations collapsed as T-34s broke through at close quarters mobility and shock-rendering range estimates and training mood. Reports recorded more than 1,500 tanks destroyed in mere days. The German II SS Panzer Corps, considered elite, with hardened veterans, had counted on their equipment's theoretical advantages. But the practical reality on the battlefield was drastically different. Tank shells ricocheted off angled Soviet armor. Visibility fell below 400 meters due to smoke and dust churned up by thousands of moving vehicles. German radio traffic conveyed growing confusion as panicked crews attempted to relay locations and losses, their protocols breaking under pressure. The expectation of technological dominance devolved into urgent calls for reinforcements and barrage fire, as units like Das Reich watched their formations contract and split under relentless Soviet attack. The unexpected factor was never raw numbers alone, but the specific tactical advantage conferred by T-34's innovative engineering. The confrontation at Kursk exposed a battlefield truth. Overlooked design and tactical assumptions could incur staggering costs. In the following minutes, we reveal the precise moments at Prokhorovka when confidence turned to desperate improvisation in combat measured by meters, seconds, and crew survival. July 12, 1943, 05:30 hours. Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser of the II SS Panzer Corps prepared his forces for a coordinated assault south of Prokhorovka, targeting the high ground along Hill 252, overlooking the Sel River. Hauser fielded approximately 300 tanks and assault guns from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, and 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf. Their objective: break through toward Kursk by forcing the collapse of Soviet armored resistance in this sector. On the Soviet side, Marshal Georgy Zhukov directed the 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rotmistrov, positioning around 850 T-34 76s and KV-1s. Soviet defensive lines stretched across an 8-kilometer front, integrating 29th Tank Corps, 18th Tank Corps, and the 2nd Guards Tank Corps in dense formations. Soviet defensive assets included 45mm anti-tank guns arranged in depth, armored sapper teams, and camouflaged T-34s armed with F-34 76.2mm guns, and protected by sloped frontal armor of 45mm set at 60 degrees. German command expected rapid destruction of Soviet armor through concentrated firepower, superior optics, and coordinated formation attacks informed by earlier victories at Kharkov. Analytical reports estimated a 2-to-1 kill ratio, favoring Tigers equipped with KWK 36 88mm guns. However, Red Army engineers had stressed battlefield survivability and mobility, deploying multi-layered field defenses in prepared positions. Aerial reconnaissance had spotted Soviet armor concentrations on July 11, but failed to detect reserve counterattack echelons hidden behind tree lines. The prepared Soviet lines would neutralize German range superiority by forcing close-quarters engagements. Deep gullies and undulating wheat fields, sometimes 2 meters high, restricted observation and turret traverse, especially as a pre-dawn ground fog layered low over the valley, further decreasing combat visibility to mere hundreds of meters. What happened in the next 6 hours would determine which army controlled the approaches to Kursk, and whether the operational initiative would remain with the German Army Group South or pass decisively to the Red Army. At 0530 hours, the first wave of German tanks from Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, supported by Tigers and Panthers mounting KW K-36 88mm and KW K-42 75mm cannons, began advancing in wedge formation toward the Selle River. The 1st SS Panzer Division deployed 4,800 men, each in regulation field uniform, equipped with MP-40 submachine guns, MG-42 machine guns, 1,200 rounds per minute, and standard Panzerfaust anti-tank grenades. The terrain in front measured 1.5 kilometers wide, covered in high wheat, creating natural concealment but limiting sightlines. By 0600 hours, Soviet T-34s under Major Ivan Zinoviev, 29th Tank Corps, poured over the ridge in counterattack, crossing the 400-meter zone in minutes. Soviet crews relied on rugged V-2 diesel engines and protected themselves behind sloped 45mm armor. Hausser's formations were targeted by emplaced 76.2mm anti-tank artillery in hull-down positions. Losses mounted rapidly. By 630, over 150 tanks between both sides had been knocked out or disabled. The Germans advanced barely 300 meters before opposition stiffened, and communication between tank commanders became erratic due to dust-clogged radios and overlapping frequency use. At 645, intelligence officer Captain Viktor Stepanovich Semyonov, posted west of Hill 252, intercepted a German message signaling armored breakthroughs. The report flagged T-34 units bypassing flanks where Panthers had suffered transmission failures, a mechanical weakness causing 4 vehicles to be abandoned. German radio operator Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann, in a Tiger north of Storijevo, reported shell impacts bouncing off Soviet hulls at under 200 meters, unaware that rotational speed of Soviet turrets outpaced his crew's ability to re-aim. The morning's humidity hovered at 83%, with visibility down to 250 meters, reducing gunnery effectiveness for both sides. At 710, a Tiger's 88mm round failed to penetrate a T-34 at 180 meters. Hausser ordered a realignment of his reserve battalion to stem the advance. By 730, over 350 armored vehicles were destroyed or abandoned along the front. But at 735, massed Soviet reinforcements surged forward, initiating another critical exchange that would define the next phase of the battle. At 0740 hours, Lieutenant Nikolai Andreev of the 32nd Tank Brigade, operating west of Storijevo, detected a sudden spike in German radio transmission failures during a coordinated T-34 push. Using a captured Fu G5 radio scanner, Andreev logged that at least 17 separate German vehicles lost functional radio contact within a 10-minute window. Soviet artillery spotters documented erratic movement in German armor formations. 8 Tigers from 1st SS Panzer split off course by over 300 meters, with scattered reports of commanders reverting to hand signals and colored flares to coordinate attacks. Visibility was measured at only 220 meters due to rising dust and lingering fog. The German Panzerbefehlswagen III Ausführung K command tanks, integral to SS rapid coordination, relied on Fu G5 and Fu G8 radios, rated for operational ranges of up to 7.5 kilometers in open fields. However, continuous artillery barrages and shock vibration levels peaking at 62 G-forces overwhelmed the chassis-mounted radio sets. The flexible antenna mounts loosened beyond field tolerance after roughly 18 minutes of sustained turret rotation and abrupt hull maneuvers, disrupting frequency stabilization and causing near-total transmission loss on the 27.2 MHz and 42 MHz channels. Field tests at the Kummersdorf Proving Ground in late 1942 did not replicate the dense dust and thermal stress encountered at Prokhorovka, leaving electromagnetic shielding effectiveness unproven in high-particulate, high-humidity environments. Such oversight, along with the overloaded communication nets from simultaneous commands, and the limited battery backup capacity of only 35 ampere-hours per set, overwhelmed German radio infrastructure faster than ever previously documented. Hausser's reserve armor, meant for counterattack, never arrived at the front line in time. Command relays broke down by 0752 hours. Within 25 minutes, German left flank movement speed dropped from an average of 11.3 kilometers per hour to under 3.2 kilometers per hour. 74 tank crews of Das Reich remained stationary, unable to advance or coordinate, as runners were forced to dash between hulls under fire. This allowed Rotmistrov to commit an additional 128 T-34s in a simultaneous enveloping maneuver tactic, not previously possible due to the risk of exposing flanks to coordinated fire. Meanwhile, the 18th Tank Corps redirected 6 Su-76 self-propelled guns from anti-infantry to direct fire roles against immobilized enemy armor. By 0815 hours, the Red Army's 5th Guards Tank Army had breached German forward positions across a 2.1 kilometer front. Over the next 2 hours, battalion-level cohesion among the SS Panzer units fractured, and post-action Soviet records indicate advances ahead of original schedule by 42 minutes. This breakdown of German communication reportedly resulted in an estimated 460 fewer Soviet casualties compared to initial staff projections. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1995 from the Central Russian State Military Archive revealed a personal diary kept by Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, 18th Tank Corps. Petrov wrote on July 12, 1943, "Visibility was so poor, we heard tanks before we saw them. Orders changed 4 times in 1 hour." This account contradicted the official after-action summary that claimed uninterrupted command flow. The discrepancy occurred because frontline correspondence was censored from Soviet staff reports. This detail remained unknown until the archive was declassified to non-Russian researchers in the mid-1990s. Supply records from the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich logged on July 11, 1943, show a significant ammunition shortfall. Standard loadout called for 92 rounds per Panther, actual inventory 58 per vehicle, on average a 37% deficit. Oberleutnant Erich Trummer reported the shortage to divisional headquarters, but the focus on fuel logistics left this risk unaddressed. This deficit meant Panzer crews were forced to conserve ammunition, limiting their ability to provide suppressive fire and delaying engagements throughout the battle. The July 13 after-action report from the II SS Panzer Corps stated only 183 German tanks were destroyed or disabled. However, Soviet war booty records and captured field reports documented the recovery and destruction of at least 237 identifiable German armored vehicles. Medical files from the Totenkopf Division indicate 589 casualties, a 32% higher figure than the official tally. Historian Valery Zamulin's 2011 analysis of captured records explained that German staff officers sometimes excluded vehicles repairable in 48 hours and only counted irrecoverable losses, skewing perceptions of attrition rates. While German command planned a broad armored thrust along Hill 252, 2. Soviet tankers at Storijevo faced sudden bogging in waterlogged gullies missed in pre-battle recon. Private Ivan Melnikov, 29th Tank Corps, extricated his T-34 by improvising with spare track links for traction. His approach was repeated in at least 43 similar cases that day, as post-war interviews with over 60 Soviet veterans confirmed. The official tactical doctrine favored rapid advance, but ground saturation forced repeated improvisation, though doctrine remained unchanged due to the inertia of command reviews. Weather data from Soviet Meteorological Station number 633 for July 12, 1943, showed humidity at 83% and visibility below 250 meters. German attack planning assumed clear, dry summer conditions. Actual temperature, 16 degrees Celsius, with persistent fog and ground-level dust. Optical rangefinders were accurate to 1,200 meters, yet in these conditions, useful range fell to 2,350 meters. Tiger tanks' optics, rated for dry climates, showed fogging and diminished clarity. This performance gap, undetected until post-war Soviet and German technical tests, explained numerous short-range duels and accidental close-contact engagements during the battle. These overlooked details aligned with evidence historians found in divisional maintenance logs and Soviet Corps-level correspondence, enriching the granular picture of Prokhorovka's operational chaos. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 concluded the German operational plan failed primarily due to Soviet numerical superiority and bravery. Historian Sir Basil Liddell Hart's 1951 study argued German technological advantage was overcome by Soviet resolve, relying on English-language translations of official Soviet dispatches and interrogations of German officers. The authoritative Soviet military history, published in 1965, stated Soviet tank losses exceeded 400 versus 160 German, confirming a 2.5-to-1 kill ratio as accepted wisdom. This interpretation persisted for nearly 3 decades because Western historians lacked access to primary Soviet and lower-level German records, and many relevant documents remained classified. Declassification of II SS Panzer Corps records and the Central Russian Military Archive in 1990 and 1995, respectively, dramatically altered this narrative. Historian Valery Zamulin's 2011 examination of German and Soviet operational logs found wide discrepancies. Soviet logs from July 12 reported German radio silence and logistical failures. German movements irregular, heavy reliance on runners. Zamulin compared Prokhorovka to the 1942 battle at Arzew. Clear communications supported a 1.8-1 loss ratio in Germany's favor. Here, German coordination collapsed, and Soviet tank losses totaled 340 versus upward of 230 German armored vehicles. The critical difference lay in dense fog and radio disruption, versus Arzhev's open terrain and stable nets, resulting in tactical confusion and closer loss ratios at Prokhorovka. Research published in 2019 by the U.S. Army Center for Military History, drawing on both Russian and German battlefield reports, recalculated German tank losses near 235 and Soviet losses between 350 to 400, a 30–40% upward revision for German losses over initial estimates. Earlier estimates claimed 150–160 German losses. Current evidence supports 230–240. Some historians, such as Ben Wheatley, argue for higher German losses based on survivability data, while Zamulin and Glantz point to Soviet operational logs supporting lower estimates. Mainstream consensus, using battlefield archaeology and cross-matched vehicle serials, strongly favors Zamulin's revised counts. The ongoing debate focuses on the precise definition of loss irrecoverable Vs, temporary, and its impact on strategic assessments of the Kursk operation. Yakov Alexandrovich Ladyshev, Senior Lieutenant, 32nd Tank Brigade, age 27, from Voronezh, was stationed northeast of Storijevo on July 12, 1943. Before the war, he was a tractor mechanic and joined the Red Army in 1940. At 750, Ladyshev faced the dilemma of obeying an order to flank a German Panther whose guns still tracked his position, risking his crew's survival. In a 1975 interview, he described, "The tank shook. I thought, will we live if I press forward?" Ladyshev chose to charge at full throttle, closing to under 30 meters before firing. His gunner destroyed the Panther, saving two T-34s boxed in behind. Ladyshev suffered shrapnel wounds and was hospitalized for 6 months, later returning to teaching mechanical engineering. Interviewed at age 59, he reflected, "Survival depended more on nerve than on orders." He died in 1984 in Voronezh. His testimony is stored at the Central Russian State Military Archive. Hermann Eugens, Oberjefreiter, SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 6, Totenkopf Division, experienced the battle from a German defensive line near Prokhorovka. Captured after his half-track was disabled by Su-76 fire. His July 13, 1943, interrogation revealed his unit believed Soviet tanks were poorly crewed. "We only realized the Soviets had broken through when rounds hit our command post." Post-war, Eugens returned to Osnabrück, Germany, and became a schoolteacher. His account corroborated Soviet reports on the suddenness of the armored breakthrough, but contradicted Red Army claims of disorganized German retreat. Nina Pavlovna Grishina, civilian nurse attached to a field hospital near the Sel River, was caught in the chaos when retreating tank crews flooded aid stations. She triaged burn and blast injuries from close-range tank duels. Post-war medical archives show she was diagnosed with nervous shock, PTSD, in 1944. Treatment options were limited. Grishina's case typified more than 25% of Soviet frontline medics exposed to tank battle trauma. By 1950, she returned to civilian life and became active in war memorialization. Her testimony helped shape Soviet studies of battlefield stress, influencing post-war reforms in military medicine. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of case files, revealed patterns that influenced command protocols, veteran support legislation, and medical doctrine during and after the war. Within 3 hours of the onset of radio failures at 0740 hours on July 12, 1943, command cohesion among German armored units at Prokhorovka deteriorated sharply. Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, then directing II SS Panzer Corps operations from his forward command post, received fragmented updates at 820 and 845 via runners, not radio. Instead of advancing 237 tanks across the planned 3.1-kilometer front toward the Sel River, Hauser ordered a defensive reorientation shifting 92 operational vehicles to cover the exposed left. This sudden pivot demanded a transfer of 24,600 liters of fuel from rear echelons and redeployment of 1,370 infantry in less than 2 hours. By 0940 hours, average forward movement slowed from 11.3 to 3.2 kilometers per hour, with the Red Army exploiting the gap to insert an additional 128 T-34s, increasing Soviet frontline armor density by over 15%. 100 within 36 hours, operational priorities shifted. Operation Citadel's southern spearhead, originally set for a 13 July push toward Aboyan, was delayed by 48 hours. Hauser conferred with General Hermann Hoth on July 13, approving an emergency allocation of 46 additional Panzer IVs to cover the weakened right flank. To reinforce the front, 262 additional tons of ammunition were rushed in from Belgorod, at the expense of deferred shipments to the 4th Panzer Army. Soviet casualty projections. initially set at 1,800 for this period, were revised to 1,340 actual, a 25% reduction, attributed to diminished German artillery barrages and loss of pre-registered fire support. Fuel consumption climbed from the predicted 5,800 barrels to 7,200 as units idled in defensive mode, while rations fell by 12%. 100 by the end of July 1943, the outcome at Prokhorovka directly impacted the broader Kursk campaign. The critical high ground at Hill 252 remained under Soviet control as of July 14, 3 days ahead of Soviet projections and 6 days earlier than German intelligence had estimated. This expedited the commencement of Operation Kutuzov on July 15, enabling simultaneous Soviet offensives north and south. The collapse of the German armored corridor forced a retreat and reallocation of combat engineers, delaying the restoration of supply lines to the southern front until August 3. Personnel consequences included the relief of Oberst Hermann Behren's Totenkopf Division on July 16, while 12 Soviet commanders received the Order of the Red Banner by July 20 for operational leadership in exploiting the breakthrough. Soviet tankers adopted the revised enveloping attack method by late July across the Second Ukrainian Front. 100 The war's timeline across the Eastern Front adjusted significantly. Multinational operations originally planned for mid-August proceeded instead in late July to early August, a difference of roughly 3 weeks. By August 5, Belgorod and Kharkov, spanning 5,000 square kilometers, had come under Soviet control more than 2 weeks ahead of initial Stalin-Stavka forecasts. Freed resources included 1,100 additional tanks and self-propelled guns, redirected to support Operation Rumyantsev by August 10. This contributed to the halting of Army Group South's planned counteroffensive by August 20. Strategic estimates once pegged German reserves in the central sector at 400 tanks by September, but post-Prokhorovka attrition left only 182 available by mid-August. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the remainder of 1943. 100 military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the critical failure of German radio communications at Prokhorovka had not occurred on July 12, 1943, the Allied timetable for Operation Kutuzov could not have commenced until July 20, approximately 5 days later than the actual July 15 start. This delay was based on the logistical requirement for Soviet forces to encircle and neutralize a fully coordinated German SS Panzer force, which otherwise would have held its defensive lines. Casualty projections from Valery Zamulin's 2011 study estimate an additional 2,200–3,600 Soviet casualties would have resulted from a protracted head-on engagement and extended artillery duels, which the Germans were prepared for in their original plans. The southern corridor east of Prokhorovka would have remained under German control until July 19 or 20, instead of the actual July 14 breakthrough, as supported by Soviet supply rate tables and German tank recall records. German forces would have retained the ability to conduct localized counterattacks until at least July 17, affecting the subsequent Soviet envelopment strategy and postponing Operation Rumyantsev's launch. Comparing the disruption at Prokhorovka to related Eastern Front tank engagements provides context. Prokhorovka involved approximately 1,200 German and 3,000 Soviet tanks over a 12-kilometer front, producing over 2,000 armored vehicle losses and halting the deepest German thrust into Kursk. The 1942 Battle of Kursk engaged 900 tanks, covered a 16-kilometer frontage, and concluded with losses of 740 armored vehicles. The 1941 Battle of Dubno saw 2,300 tanks committed, but only 1,400 lost and no significant change in front control. Staff colleges at Frunze Military Academy, Russia, and the German Führungsakademie study Prokhorovka alongside these battles for its demonstration of rapid operational tempo and the dangers of compromised command systems. Analysis shows 34% of all Kursk campaign armored casualties were inflicted at Prokhorovka, compared with 22% at Rzhev. Historian David Glance's 2017 survey ranked Prokhorovka as the third most decisive engagement of Kursk out of 11 major armored confrontations, based on timing, resource allocation, and maneuvers enabled or denied by the day's outcome. The academic assessment is rooted in converging evidence. The U.S. Army Center for Military History maintains that the collapse of German radio nets irreversibly shifted tactical momentum, citing both battlefield archaeology and operational archives. Historian Valery Zamulin highlights that uncertainty persists about exact vehicle losses, but consensus now holds that the paralysis in German coordination, not merely armor design, was the proximate cause of Soviet advances. The main historiographical debate zeroes in on whether rapid Soviet exploitation or German technical overconfidence drove the outcome. Recently declassified post-battle reports from German Army Group South confirm that over 60% of counterorder failures corresponded directly with known radio outage periods. The academic consensus rates Prokhorovka as critical, citing measurable advances in front timelines, reduced Soviet casualties, and durable shifts in campaign-level resource distribution. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Yakov Alexandrovich Ladyshev, senior lieutenant, 32nd Tank Brigade, who led a T-34 crew at Prokhorovka, returned to Voronezh in 1944 after convalescing from shrapnel wounds. Post-war, he taught mechanical engineering at a Polytechnic Institute for nearly 30 years and was a founding committee member of the Prokhorovka Memorial Fund in the 1970s. In a 1975 interview with the Central Russian State Military Archive, he recalled, "Those moments in the tank each second, you decided not just for yourself, but for all in your care." Ladyshev remained in contact with 14 surviving crewmen. His testimony and diary are preserved at the archive's Kursk collection. Ladyshev died in 1984, age 68, in Voronezh. The memorial on the field of Prokhorovka, located on the site of the main armored clash, was dedicated on May 9, 1987. Its central bell tower, over 50 meters high, honors the nearly 7,000 tankers of both sides killed or wounded on July 12, 1943. Annual Victory Day commemorations on May 9 attract upwards of 12,000 visitors. The 75th anniversary in 2018 included surviving veterans, Russian defense officials, and German diplomatic representatives. The Frunze Military Academy has integrated Prokhorovka battle studies into its operational art curriculum since 1993, using the case to demonstrate rapid exploitation and risks inherent in centralized command. In 1996, the Russian ground forces overhauled tank company radio communications standards based directly on post-Soviet studies of 1943 failures, a reform affecting every battalion, over 400 units. The Central Russian State Military Archive holds 18,500 pages of reports and 42 complete oral histories from the battle. Tactical lessons from Prokhorovka shaped modern doctrines. The principle of redundant radio and physical signaling directly informed reforms used in Chechnya, 1999-2000, when Russian armored units adopted dual-band encrypted radios across 220 battalions. In 2012, the Stavka Military Academy published an analysis linking signal security requirements to Prokhorovka, guiding procurement of integrated communication suites. Issues with Panther and Tiger vision equipment led to updated dust and moisture protection standards, resulting in the universal adoption of hermetically sealed optics in Russian and German tanks by 2010. The site at Prokhorovka remains a protected national memorial, drawing over 48,000 visitors annually.